He was at the top of the world, and then, with a single phone call, everything he had built began to collapse. Los Angeles, August 1993. The summer heat pressed down on the city like a fist. Michael Jackson had just returned from the Dangerous World Tour, one of the most successful tours in history. Stadiums packed with screaming fans, record-breaking ticket sales, 69 countries, 120 concerts. The name Michael Jackson was not just famous, it was mythological. And then the phone rang. Not his phone, a lawyer's phone. And the words spoken in that call would set off a chain of events that would shake the entire world and break one man in ways that no stadium, no spotlight, no standing ovation could ever repair. Nobody knew it yet. But the world had just started turning in a different direction. To understand what happened in the summer of 1993, you have to go back further. You have to understand what Michael Jackson had become. By 1993, he wasn't simply a pop star. He was something that had never existed before and hasn't existed since. The Thriller album had sold over 65 million copies. The Bad Tour had grossed more than any tour in history. His face was on every magazine cover on every continent. Children in villages in Africa knew his name. Grandmothers in Japan owned his records. He had performed for kings, presidents, and popes. And through all of it, Michael had maintained something precious, an image of innocence. Neverland Ranch was the living, breathing symbol of that innocence. 3,000 acres in the Santa Ynez Valley, a private amusement park, a zoo, carnival rides, train tracks winding through the grounds, and always, always, children. Children who had never seen such a place. Children who were sick or poor or simply forgotten by the world. Michael opened his home to them freely, joyfully, genuinely. That was the story the world knew. But here's what was truly shocking. The story that was about to be told was completely different. And once it was told, nothing would ever be the same. The name was Evan Chandler. He was a dentist in Los Angeles. His son, Jordan, was 13 years old, and Jordan had spent considerable time at Neverland, with Michael's knowledge, with his family's knowledge, in what appeared to be a genuine friendship between a lonely superstar and a child who admired him. But in the summer of 1993, Evan Chandler made allegations. He alleged that Michael Jackson had sexually abused his son. The moment those allegations became public, the air went out of the room. Not just in Hollywood, not just in America, everywhere. In every country where Michael Jackson's music played on the radio, where his posters hung on bedroom walls, where his moonwalk was imitated in school playgrounds, people stopped and waited. Michael was in Bangkok when it happened. He was mid-tour. The Dangerous World Tour was still running. He stepped onto the stage each night and performed for tens of thousands of people who screamed his name until their voices gave out. And while they screamed, while the spotlights blazed and the pyrotechnics exploded and the crowd surged forward, somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew. He knew what was waiting for him when the music stopped. People who were with him during those Bangkok shows described something that haunted them for years. On stage, Michael was Michael, unassailable, electric. The performance was flawless. But in the moments between songs, in the brief seconds when the music paused and the crowd held its breath, something crossed his face. Something nobody could name. It wasn't fear exactly. It wasn't anger. It was something older and quieter and more devastating than either of those things. This is the moment everything changed. because Michael Jackson was about to face something no concert, no album, no tour could have prepared him for. The investigation began in August 1993. The Los Angeles Police Department opened a criminal investigation. The Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office opened another one. Suddenly, Michael Jackson, the most famous person on Earth, was under the microscope of two simultaneous law enforcement investigations. The media response was instantaneous and merciless. Within days, the story was everywhere. Every tabloid, every news broadcast, every radio station. The allegations were reported with a breathless urgency that seemed to care very little about the presumption of innocence. Headlines screamed. Talk show hosts speculated. Former employees, some legitimate, some of very questionable credibility, lined up to give their accounts to anyone with a camera or a notepad. Michael's publicist at the time later recalled the atmosphere as unlike anything she had ever seen. Not even in Hollywood, a city that had witnessed more than its share of scandals, had she seen anything move this fast, hit this hard, spread this wide. It was, she said, like watching someone get eaten alive, and Michael felt every bite. People close to him during that period describe a man who aged visibly, almost week by week. The playfulness that had always defined him, the laughter, the pranks, the childlike delight in everything, went quiet. He became withdrawn in ways that alarmed even those who had known him for years. He stopped eating properly. He stopped sleeping. The physical toll was immediate and visible. But it was the internal toll that nobody could see that was truly devastating. Michael Jackson had built his entire identity around one thing: goodness, not just talent, not just success. Goodness. The belief that he was, at his core, a force for love in the world. His charity work wasn't performative. It was compulsive, deeply personal, rooted in something that went all the way back to a little boy in Gary, Indiana, who had grown up feeling like he never belonged anywhere. Neverland wasn't a celebrity vanity project. It was his attempt to give other children the childhood he never had. And now the world was looking at that attempt and seeing something monstrous. Don't miss this, because what happened next would reveal something about Michael Jackson that the headlines completely missed. On November 12, 1993, Michael Jackson issued a statement. He did it via a pre-recorded television address, broadcast simultaneously around the world. He sat in front of a camera, alone, and he spoke. His voice was quiet, controlled. But if you watched his eyes, and millions of people did, you could see something there that no prepared statement could conceal. He denied the allegations, categorically, completely, without qualification. He spoke about his skin condition, vitiligo, which had caused his appearance to change dramatically over the years, and which he had never spoken about publicly before. He spoke about the physical examination he had been subjected to, a humiliating, invasive procedure that he described with barely concealed anguish. He said that the examination had been the most horrifying experience of his life. And then he said something that millions of people have never forgotten. He said, "I ask all of you to wait and hear the facts before you label or condemn me. Don't treat me like a criminal because I am innocent." The world watched, and the world was divided. Behind the scenes, the legal machinery was grinding forward relentlessly. Michael's legal team was led by Johnny Cochran, who would later become famous for the O.J. Simpson trial. They were fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously: the criminal investigation, the civil lawsuit filed by the Chandler family, and the court of public opinion, which was arguably the most brutal battlefield of all. The settlement came in January 1994. Michael Jackson agreed to pay Jordan Chandler a sum reported to be approximately $23 million. He admitted no wrongdoing. The settlement explicitly stated that it was not an admission of guilt. But the world didn't hear the second part of that sentence. The world heard Michael Jackson paid $23 million, and for many people, the story ended there. What the settlement actually represented is something that legal experts and biographers have argued about ever since. Michael's supporters pointed out, correctly, that settling a civil lawsuit out of court is an extremely common practice, especially for wealthy individuals and corporations facing litigation. It is frequently cheaper, faster, and less disruptive to settle than to fight, regardless of guilt or innocence. Michael himself reportedly did not want to settle. According to multiple accounts from people in his inner circle, he was furious about the decision. He wanted to fight. He wanted to stand in a courtroom and prove his innocence publicly. But his advisors argued otherwise. The criminal investigation was ongoing. A civil trial would expose him to months of brutal cross-examination. The risk, financially, reputationally, emotionally, was deemed too great. In the end, he deferred to their judgment. It was a decision he would spend the rest of his life questioning. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet, because the criminal investigation told a very different story than the one the media was reporting. Here is what the media coverage of 1993 largely failed to emphasize. The criminal investigation, conducted by the Los Angeles Police Department and the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office, lasted 14 months. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses. They searched Neverland Ranch. They examined every piece of evidence they could find. At the end of 14 months, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office declined to file criminal charges. Not because of a lack of effort, not because of a cover-up, but because the evidence did not support prosecution. Jordan Chandler, despite the civil settlement, refused to testify in the criminal proceeding. Without his testimony, the case could not proceed. This fact, the fact that no criminal charges were ever filed as a result of the 1993 investigation, was reported far less prominently than the original allegations had been. The allegations had been front-page news around the world. The decision not to prosecute was, in many outlets, a footnote. Michael Jackson noticed that asymmetry, and it hollowed him out. 1994 came and went. Michael Jackson did something that surprised almost everyone. He got married. On May 26, 1994, he married Lisa Marie Presley, the daughter of Elvis Presley, in a private ceremony in the Dominican Republic. The world was skeptical. The tabloids were merciless. The marriage was scrutinized and mocked with an enthusiasm that said less about Michael and Lisa Marie and more about how thoroughly the public had already decided who Michael Jackson was. The marriage lasted less than 2 years. When it ended, Michael was alone again. But something had changed during those years. Something had shifted in the foundation of who he was. The man who had walked into 1993 as the most beloved entertainer on earth walked out of it as something else entirely. A controversy, a question mark, a person about whom reasonable people disagreed and about whom unreasonable people had already made up their minds. Wait, because this is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. The History album came out in June 1995. It was Michael's response. Not in interviews, not in press releases, but in music. The album was enormous, a double album, one disc of greatest hits and one disc of new material. And the new material was unlike anything Michael had ever released before. It was angry. Songs like Scream, a duet with his sister Janet, were raw with barely contained fury at the media and the public that had turned on him. They Don't Care About Us was a thundering indictment of injustice that drew controversy of its own. Stranger in Moscow was something different entirely. A quiet, devastating meditation on isolation that felt like a confession. In Stranger in Moscow, Michael sang about walking through the rain alone, feeling watched, feeling hunted, feeling like a stranger in his own life. It was the most honest thing he had ever recorded. People who knew him said that the song captured exactly how he felt during those years, in ways that no interview, no statement, no public appearance ever could. He was a stranger in Moscow. He was a stranger everywhere. The years between 1993 and 2003 were a kind of suspended state. Michael continued to make music. He continued to perform occasionally. He continued to open Neverland to children. He continued to do the things he had always done. But now, everything he did was viewed through the lens of suspicion that 1993 had created. The accusations had never been proven, but they had never been forgotten either. And in 2003, they came back. A British journalist named Martin Bashir had been given extraordinary access to Michael's life for a documentary. Michael had trusted him. He had opened Neverland. He had spoken candidly. He had let cameras into the most private corners of his existence. The documentary aired in February 2003. It was called Living with Michael Jackson. And what Bashir presented, the editing choices, the framing, the commentary, felt to Michael and those around him like a profound betrayal. And just when you thought the worst was behind him, this is the real shock. The documentary reignited everything. A new accuser emerged. New allegations were made. In 2003, Michael Jackson was arrested. He was photographed in handcuffs. The images went around the world in hours. The man who had danced for kings, who had made children laugh, who had written songs that a billion people had sung. That man was led away in handcuffs. He posted bail. He went home. But nothing about his home felt like home anymore. The trial began in January 2005 and lasted 5 months. Every day, Michael drove to the courthouse in Santa Maria, California. Every day, cameras were waiting. Every day, the world watched. And every day, Michael sat in that courtroom, composed, distant, diminished, and endured. On June 13, 2005, the verdict was read, not guilty, on all 14 counts. The courtroom erupted. Supporters outside the courthouse wept. Michael stood and received the verdict with a stillness that those present have described as almost unearthly. He had won, but winning had cost him everything. The man who walked out of that courthouse in June 2005 was not the same man who had danced on the Thriller video in 1983. He was not the man who had stood on the stage in Tokyo in 1988 and made 100,000 people lose their minds. He was not even the man who had sat in front of a camera in November 1993 and asked the world to wait and hear the facts. He was someone older, quieter, hollowed out in the places that used to hold the most light. The years of suspicion, the years of investigation, the civil lawsuit, the settlement, the documentary, the arrest, the trial, the verdict. 12 years of it. 12 years of being the most scrutinized human being on earth. 12 years of having his goodness questioned, his motives doubted, his character dissected by people who had never met him and never would. He had survived it, but survival had a price. After the acquittal, Michael left America. He moved to Bahrain, then to Ireland, then to Las Vegas. He was quiet. He was private. He gave almost no interviews. He was, in the eyes of the public, absent. But he was still there, still making music, still dreaming about performing again. Still, in the small hours of the night, playing piano alone in whatever room he happened to be in, writing melodies that nobody had yet heard. A man who had given the world everything it had asked for, and then some. A man who had asked for one thing in return: to be believed. In 2009, he announced the This Is It tour. 50 concerts at the O2 Arena in London. His return. His vindication. Tickets sold out in minutes. And for a moment, just a moment, it seemed like the world was ready to give him what he had always wanted. But by then, the damage was already done. The years of accusation and investigation and trial had taken something irreplaceable from Michael Jackson. Not his talent, that was untouched, as the This Is It rehearsal footage would later prove beyond any doubt. Not his love for his audience, that was as fierce as it had ever been. What they had taken was his certainty. The certainty that the world was fundamentally good, that love was stronger than cruelty, that innocence was its own protection. He had believed those things once, with the whole of his heart. He wasn't sure he believed them anymore. On June 24, 2009, the night of his final rehearsal, a young dancer on the This Is It production said something to him between run-throughs. She told him she was nervous, that the scale of it all overwhelmed her. Michael looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "The audience doesn't see you. They feel you. And if you really feel it, they will too." She asked him how he stayed calm. He didn't answer right away. He looked out at the empty arena, at the thousands of seats that would soon be filled, at the lights that would soon blaze down on him for the first time in years. And then, very quietly, he said, "I never stopped believing in them, even when they stopped believing in me." He went home that night. He never performed again. The world mourned him as the king of pop, as a legend, as an icon. The tributes came from every corner of the earth. But the people who had known him, really known him, mourned something more specific. They mourned the boy from Gary, Indiana, who had wanted, more than anything else, to make people happy, who had done exactly that for 50 years, for billions of people, without ever once being given the one thing he needed most in return: the benefit of the doubt. In a world filled with hate, we must still dare to hope. In a world filled with anger, we must still dare to comfort. In a world filled with despair, we must still dare to dream. And in a world filled with distrust, we must still dare to believe. Michael Jackson. This story is written in a documentary fiction format, based on documented historical events, public records, and verified accounts. All dialogue and internal descriptions are dramatized interpretations for narrative purposes.